Good morning. It's a great honor for me to be here in Guyana. President Ali, Prime Minister Phillips, Vice President Jagdeo. It's a great honor to be here. Prime Minister Rowley, Prime Minister Gonzalez, and distinguished members of this amazing business sustainability community. I want this morning to refer to this amazing transformation that is taking place in Guyana. And I have called this presentation Sustainability. How can we approach the right technologies, the right decisions, the right policies to introduce changes that allow social transformation while at the same time advancing on energy transitions and allowing communities to benefit? And in fact, the first concept that I want to present before you is that the times we are living are times where we have two sides of a coin. One side is that today we have a major climate crisis that is the most important challenge of our lifetime. The world has met for 27 times in order to ensure that we are able to stabilize climate in a percentage or in at least an objective of no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius in the next decade. But the world has also committed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 45% by 2030. And the reason is because today, droughts and floods and the rising of the temperature in the sea are generating massive national disasters. But at the same time, this is triggering climate migration, and it is also triggering around the world the increase in transmittable disease because of a rise of temperature. That is a reality that is undisputable. But there's another reality, and it is that the world needs to ensure at the same time energy security. And it has to be available, it has to be functional, it has to be sustainable, it has to be scalable, and the most costly energy that a country can face is the one that you don't have access to. So we have to be able, in the times we live, to generate a balance between climate action and energy security. And that also involves that the decision-making process in the governments start asking the questions that we have seen for so many years. What you see here in this graph are just covers of a magazine that we have seen in different moments in time where they say, it's oil going to come to an end? And I think the response to this is no, it's not going to come to an end. What you see here are International Energy Agency patterns of analysis, where what you see in green are the net zero commitments, what you see in yellow are the policy commitments, and what you see in blue are the real things that are happening in terms of state actions. So to the question, is oil over and is going to be over in the short term, the response is no. But that doesn't mean that we are going to deny the fact that we need to continue advancing in reducing emissions, because that is a compromise for the world. And our countries need to take that decision. And what you see also here in this graph is what is going to be the pattern of natural gas. So these two forms of fuel are there. And if they are there, that also implies that considering that we were going to have an oil peak in consumption by 2035, that also let us know that when you have access to oil and gas, you have to be able to sustainably use that fuel and at the same time advance on your environmental policies. What is also interesting is that when we evaluate patterns of the oil and gas industry, we can tell it's going to be present. We might have this peak coming up in the next decade, but we're also seeing that the patterns of production tend to look that there's going to be a decrease. Some of you might dispute that, but what is interesting is that the International Energy Agency has said that between now and 2035, we might have a reduction in the worldwide production, which also means that we're going to have costlier energy. And if you have the access to these resources, you have to be able to consider that even if you have a reduction of the consumption pattern that's also taking place, countries that have access to this type of energy need to advance in what I call a smart transition. And what does a smart transition mean? It means using the richness of the underground to eradicate the poverty on ground. This is the image of what Qatar looked like 50 years ago, and this is what Qatar looks today. And they used the richness of the underground to eradicate the poverty and generate social, economic, and technological transformations. And nobody can deny to a country the right to enter that process. And that process has to take place with the balance that even though you have to use those resources, you have to do as much as possible to be carbon neutral or carbon negative, but at the same time, nature positive. Nature positive, carbon neutral are two concepts that the world needs to advance, and that is not a yin-yang contradiction with using the resources that you have to generate the income that can help you advance in social and economic transformation. So the question is, how can this happen? And there are multiple ways of doing it. Obviously, there has to be an energy transition. But those transitions take time. Those transitions require that there's investment, but that there are incentives. It requires to have new technologies. It requires to understand the complexities of also new forms of energy. The reliability, the frequency, the supply, the uncertainties, things that we regularly see when it comes to solar and wind. But we have to advance in those type of transformations. We can also start thinking of how do we transform our car fleet around the world. Why? Because it's also part of our human ethics of the 21st century to be able to reduce our own carbon footprint. But there has to be coherence. So we're going to move forward with electric vehicles. We have to think, how clean is our energy matrix to generate electricity? Because if those two elements are not coherent, then we might be erasing with our elbow what we started with our hand. And we also have to consider that even though we use regular energy, that we make the transitions, we still have to protect nature. We have to protect the landscapes. We have to protect those areas that are crucial ecosystems for the present and the future of humanity. The picture that I had here seconds ago is one of the most beautiful landscapes that Guyana has for the world. And imagine that this country has more than 90% of its territory in tropical jungle, and that it has one of the lowest levels of deforestation around the world. So as we advance in energy, and as we advance in the transitions, and as we want to build a low carbon development economy, we also have to ensure that the protected areas are increased for the good sake of humanity. So you might ask, is this theory? It is not. And the Colombian case that I want to present before you can also demonstrate that things are possible. What you see here in this image is the San Francisco oil camp in the region of El Meta of Colombia. You have one of the most important oil fields in our country, with more than 20% of the oil production takes place. But that same oil field is one of the largest auto-consuming sites with non-conventional renewable energies. And at the same time, you see the palm that has been grown and that allows them to produce palm oil and to supply the country's necessities. So the balance can happen and shall happen, and particularly in the case of Colombia, our national oil and gas company, Ecopetrol, became the largest auto consumer with non-conventional renewable energies. So it's not a yin-yang. It's not good or bad. It's not day or night. It's a complementary system where all forms of energy can participate actively. And while a country like Colombia has been able to increase its oil production, increase its reserves, grant new fields, develop offshore oil and gas, we face also a very important and substantial energy transition in the last 4 years. What you see in this slide is how Colombia looked like in 2018, where we only had barely 28 megawatts of installed capacity in non-conventional renewables. Based on auctions, transparent auctions, based on incentives, we were able to pass from that 28 megawatts to 2,800, which was passing from 0.2% of the energy matrix to getting close to 20%. That complements that 75% of our electricity is generated by water. So this makes Colombia one of the countries in the world with one of the cleanest energy matrices. And this happened at the same time that we were developing oil and gas and increasing our reserves and reducing also the industry's carbon footprint. So it's coherent to advance in this direction. And we are also keen in looking at the opportunity to develop a green taxonomy that we launched at the New York Stock Exchange. We were able to develop green financing, issue green bonds with 7% greeniums based on the policies that we have that has been recognized by the markets. We have been able to develop a voluntary carbon market that allows new players to participate in without using a negative speech against the traditional forms of energy that generate more than 40% of our exports, more than 30% of our foreign direct investment, and more than 30% of the market capitalization in our local capital market. And we were also convinced that in a country that has almost 2 million square kilometers combining on land and maritime territory, we took the decision of increasing the protected areas, passing from 14% to 34%. And that helped us not only protect the tropical jungle and the rainforest and the high altitude ecosystems better known as páramos, but also helped us protect the coral reefs, which guaranteed the sustainability of fishing industries in different parts of the country, but guaranteed that we're protecting the house of more than 45% of the species that we have in our maritime territory. So it's all complementary. And it makes sense. And we try to look the right compensation. But we also presented a coherent circular economy policy where the oil and gas industry was also present at creation and participant in the way water is used, in the way the gases are sequestered, transformed, and eventually will become a source of blue hydrogen, would also be connected to the grid based on that sequestration and the separation by chemical processes of different components, and are looked as an opportunity to generate energy. And what I want to bring today is that I think Guyana is a very important model to share with the world. In 2009, Guyana launched the low carbon development strategy. And it was not just great paperwork, great vision. It is a coherent policy that is taking place day by day. And I want to praise you, President Ali, because you have updated this policy that started with President Jagdeo at the time, now Vice President, And you have aligned this with the realities of this amazing country. And the first thing that I want to highlight is that Guyana has today the possibility of using the richness of the underground to close the social divide, to eradicate poverty on ground. Guyana has the condition of being a carbon neutral or even a carbon negative country. It has one of the lowest deforestation levels in the world. But that richness has to be used intelligently. And there has to be a plan for an economic transition that allows this country to become a very important player in food security, energy security, science and technology in the Caribbean, and the possibility to be a hub for entrepreneurship. But that requires a commitment of the private sector with nature, of the private sector of different industries. And we have to consider that the communities, President Ali, as we have discussed it, are looking forward that the benefits of the oil and gas boom transmit rapidly in the change of their conditions. So we have discussed about the possibility of having the anticipation of royalties, or even to allow the players in the oil and gas sector to also, as we did it in Colombia, to do works for royalties, where a portion of the royalties can be transferred by public works that are needed by communities. And that accelerates the process of communities to gain the benefits of the boom. But it also implies to have a smarter regulation, rapid regulation that enhances on a permanent basis more players coming to the country. And the low carbon strategy is thinking that the industry of oil and gas, of offshore oil and gas, can also trigger the possibility of an oil and gas offshore services to be developed and create in Guyana, one of the most important hubs for this kind of business around the world. And we, for sure, want to see that the benefits of this can enhance the expansion of the social safety net of this country. We shall see this opportunity not as the opportunity for the oil and gas to do well. We have to see this opportunity to demonstrate that the low carbon development strategy is coherent by bringing the resource that ensures that the transformation takes place, and that conditional and non-conditional transfers for the people in need are really creating the opportunity that people expect. I think wisely the country is investing in hospitals, that it's investing in education, but they also have to invest in indigenous communities. And this is one of the best stories to be told about Guyana. Not only that there's a carbon strategy taking place, not only that there's a transition in the energy foreseen for the future and the close present, not only that there are new industries coming to play a role, not only that you're expanding the protected areas, but also that this country has taken a lead in working with indigenous communities, and you'll see that tomorrow in this conference. The indigenous communities can be crucial players in nature-based solutions, in aggregated value chains, and they have a very important, substantial part of the territory where they exercise not only control, but an effective protection of nature. And I believe that the next big thing that can happen to Guyana, and these are images of infrastructure projects that have taken place in Colombia, is that all this boom that is aimed to generate these transformations needs to transform the infrastructure of the country in a rapid way. The development of public-private partnerships, the development of private sector-specific interventions, be able to connect the country, and this also implies connectivity for digital transformation. All this can happen at the same time where this country is one of the most effective protectors of nature in Latin America and the Caribbean. But I also believe that the next thing that has to happen here is that the energy matrix for electricity generation has to change, and you have that in your mind, President Ali. The country is heavily relied on heavy crude oil for generating electricity, and that can be changed with gas, which has now been considered by the European Union as a green fuel in the energy transition, while at the same time you add wind and solar to the matrix. Because what you want to ensure is that you use less oil for your electricity, export more, bring more resources for the social transformations of the country. And I also believe that the opportunity for non-conventional renewables is also there. You have almost the size of Ecuador in Guyana, with only 800,000 citizens. That means you have land to produce with solar panels, plants that can be above 100 megawatts connected to the grid and start transforming the composition of the grid. You may think that the reliability is a question mark, but you can also advance on storage. But you need to start accelerating that change, and that's part of the low carbon development plan for the country. And even if you're having this opportunity of gas, the possibility of producing hydrogen in the country is also a way of thinking of the fuels of the 21st century. Even though oil is going to be present for the next 5 or 6 or 7 decades, we still see an opportunity for these fuels to be developed with the right incentives and with the right composition. And that is not in a contradiction with the idea of also building nature-based solutions with aggregated value chains from food security to industrial production to ports development. They all can happen when the private sector is heavily committed to protect areas of this country and to make the Guayanese shield an opportunity of sustainable biotourism, which is also part of the low carbon development strategy. And we have seen that Guyana, having this richness that is shared with the world, can pass from an 8% declaration of protected areas to meet the target that the country has already established by 2030, which is to have 30%. But even if you have not declared, more than 80% of this landscape, 90% of this landscape, are considered virgin tropical forest. So increasing the protected areas is also a way to demonstrate the commitment of Guyana. And we have to all believe that the carbon credit markets is also a possibility for this country. We need to identify the right pricing. We need to bring the industry players, the industrial players, the conservation players, everyone to develop this market and be able to monetize resources that go to the communities. That is also part of the strategy that, in my opinion, no other country in Latin America has been able to clarify in such a way, being one of the lowest generators of greenhouse gases in the whole region. And the possibility of food security is another part of the future of Guyana. Excellencies, members of CARICOM, Guyana can be a supplier of food in times of food insecurity and rising food prices. The support of all the industrial players is very important to ensure that this is not just a good story of how we can make resources out of oil and gas, but how oil and gas can be the triggers of this transformation in which a country can become a provider of food in times of need, of high prices and high inflation for the rest of the Caribbean. And I have to say that the other big opportunity is that the production of gas can create an LNG hub in which Guyana can be one of the most important suppliers of LNG for the whole Caribbean and be an influencer and a positive transformator of energy security for the Caribbean and for the rest of the hemisphere. So this is happening, and it's happening at a moment where today the green financing can be a way to present Guyana before the eyes of the world. President Ali, with the low carbon development strategy,
the creation of a taxonomy that can be challenged before the eyes of ESG investors around the world, can mobilize resources like no other time this country has seen. And I am pretty sure that the challenge Guyana has for 2030 is not just to make profits out of the richness of the underground to eradicate the poverty on ground, and it's not just to create growth, but be able by 2030 to demonstrate that the low carbon development strategy was a success and that the sustainable development goals, those 17 goals, are in the roads to be achieved. So ladies and gentlemen, my final comment is that in times where the world is seeing so much polarization about the way we manage energy, so it's black or white with oil and gas, which is a great mistake. Today we can say that in the case of Guyana, there's no yin-yang, there's no contradiction. The country is doing what it has to do in terms of exploiting resources that are needed to reduce poverty and generate an economic and social transformation, while being at the same time a conservation superpower. This is what today the world needs to do, and this is the best way to demonstrate that this is possible. Thank you very much.